Hi, my name is Kleinerman. I'm a program manager in the SQL Server Engine team and feeling very strong about best practices. I've grandfathered the project called the SQL Best Practices Analyzer. So today we're going to talk about the SQL Server Best Practices Analyzer. What is the analyzer, also known as BPA? It's an application that you can point to your SQL Server and it will scan for a predefined list of recommendations and best practices on how to best use your SQL Server. Where did these rules and recommendations come from? They came from the SQL Server team, people from this building, and from SQL Server users, from feedback from email, news groups. Our MVPs helped a lot. Are they must-do recommendations and rules? Sometimes they are, sometimes they are not. One of the common questions I get very often is what happens if I don't comply? As the name implies, there are best practices. Think about whether I am backing up my databases regularly or whether I'm using good coding guidelines on T-SQL. The most important thing is that this helps you build more maintainable applications and be a better SQL Server user. Since this tool was created, many of the members of the development team have been giving us feedback, and they send recommendations based on how the features are built. So this not only helps you be a better user, but it also helps the general community use the product in the way that we are building it for. So it is a win-win situation in which you understand what are the design principles behind the feature work in SQL Server, and it helps you have better maintainability and performance in your application. Without going into a lot of additional detail, we should just go over the application itself, in which I'll describe the different concepts and we can see it live scanning a SQL Server. So let's look at BPA. Okay, so here I am in SQL Query Analyzer, an application that most of you should be familiar with, which I am going to use to create a sample database and a couple of sample objects, which we will then feed to BPA and see what recommendations it gives us based on our small database schema. So the first step is to go ahead and create a database. I'm gonna call it MSDN. It was created successfully. I am going to make now that database the current database. Next step, I am going to create a table. Let's call it tab 1. And let's keep it simple and say that it has a single column, which is an integer column. Now I'm going to create a store procedure. Let's say access tab 1, which will have two queries. The first one will be a straightforward query on top of table tab 1, and the second one will retrieve some rows from the system table called syslogs, which is no longer available in SQL Server 2005, and we'll use it to show how BPA can help us prepare for upgrade to the next release of SQL Server by giving us checks on objects and syntax that have been changed or obsoleted in Yukon release. So as I said, the first query I'm going to retrieve, let's say, only some rows, top 50 rows of the table tab 1. And the second query, I want to say that I want select star from master, which is where syslogs is defined. And note that I did not specify a schema, which is also considered bad programming practice. Just to make my application also not look that good, I'm going to use some locking hints. I'm going to say that it is a no lock scan, and that I want the query processor to generate a plan in which the first row is generated fast. So I'll give the fast first row hint. I go ahead and create this procedure. I can run it now and see if everything ended up properly. And yes, if I run it, I can see no rows returned for tab 1 and a couple of rows being returned from syslogs. So now I'm going to go ahead and launch BPA and see what information it can give us based on our sample MSDN database. Okay, so this is the welcome screen that you see each time that you launch BPA. You'll see a link that it says click here for login page, and this takes you to a screen that will prompt you for a server and credentials to log on into something called the repository. The repository is a database that was created during BPA install, and it stores basically 3 pieces of information. It stores the list of SQL servers that are to be scanned. It stores the list of rules or checks that will be performed or that are available to perform against a given list of SQL servers. And probably the most interesting part of the repository is that it also stores the results of executions, the results of scanning SQL servers, which we can then use to run queries and write reports based on compliance and non-compliance of the different servers according to the different rules. So the data is predefined according to the information that I specified at setup. So as soon as I click here to log on, I am taken to the SQL Server screen. Since this is the first time that I've run BPA and I have no SQL servers registered to be scanned, this pane is displayed automatically for me to register a SQL server that I want to scan for compliance on best practices. So the machine where we created the previous database is called Kleinerman, and it's a SQL server named instance called dev. I can give it a friendly name or think of it as an alias name. I'll specify which credentials will BPA use to connect to that server. If I specify that I do not want Windows authentication, when I go and scan the specific SQL server, I will be prompted for credentials. But for this demo, let's just keep it simple and say that we'll use Windows authentication, which, by the way, is also a best practice and a recommended guideline. An option with BPA is to specify for this given server which databases I want to be scanned. Star is selected by default, which it means that it will scan all databases available in the server. But I just want to do analysis of the MSDN database that we just created. An option that I will not use is the ability to specify trace files or files created with SQL Profiler. I'm going to leave it empty and I'm going to go ahead and click Save. So now I have this server Kleinerman dev registered to be scanned. The next step in using Best Practice Analyzer is to create what we call a best practice group. I go to this screen and I see I don't have any defined, so I'll click on Create Best Practice Group. The way to think about a best practice group is just a binding or an association between one or more SQL servers to be scanned and one or more of the predefined rules that come with BPA. So I'll say this is our MSDN TV episode. I'll select the server that I want to scan, and you'll see that there are many rules defined in this list. They are categorized: backup and recovery, configuration, database design. If I click on any of these, I can see what are the rules that are available. In particular, based on the definition of the database that I created, I'm going to go to the T-SQL category. I'm going to select all of them. There will be checks on cursors, on our usage of the insert statement, trigger rules, comparisons to nulls, many analysis of T-SQL syntax, and will tell us whether we are following a recommended set of best practices or not. And the next thing that I'm going to select is the category SQL Server 2005 Readiness, which as hard as we've tried to maintain backwards compatibility with SQL Server 2000, there are a few cases in which this is unavoidable, usually due to adding new functionality or for various reasons. But I'm going to go ahead and say that I want this database also checked for readiness of SQL Server 2005. I'll go ahead and click on Save, which will basically store in the repository the association of which rules I selected and which servers I selected. Here we see that this was successfully created. So the next step is just to click on it, which moves it to this bottom pane, and it is the list of best practice groups that will be executed. Now I can go ahead and click Scan, which will attempt to authenticate SQL Server specified, which we see that this one has been successful, given that it was configured for Windows authentication. And now I'm ready to go ahead and click Next, at which point the scan will begin. For those of you that have been familiar with MBSA, the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer, you'll see that the process is very, very similar. Select a server, click a couple of next links, and you have the tool running. At this point, what is BPA doing? It's connecting to the database we specified, and it will retrieve all lists of stored procedures, functions, view definitions, inline table value functions, and triggers, and will retrieve the SQL text of those objects, and will do an analysis of the different checks. So based on what we had created on the previous screen, it should say that hints, even though they are correctly specified in SQL 2000, in Yukon we will require a with keyword right here in this position. That should be flagged. We should also expect flagged saying that syslocks will be removed. It should also say that tab 1 and that syslocks were created without a schema qualification or an owner qualification. Another programming practice that it's not recommended is to use star. It is better to give a predefined list of columns, explicit list of columns that you want to retrieve. This leads to a more maintainable application. And the last one that I created here is top query without specifying an order by clause, which is also generally recommended. Otherwise, the set of rows that will be returned will be plan dependent. Okay, so after this couple of minutes or whatever it took, we see this is the result of the execution. We see that for the usage of column prefixes, everything succeeded. For cursor usage, there are no complaints. Basically, given that we had no cursors in here, I can filter this whole long list by compliance and not compliance. So I just want to see elements that have been found non-compliant. So we see this one, the obsolete system tables, and we can ask for details. And it says that database MSDN, the object name, access tab 1, which is a store procedure, is accessing the table syslocks, which will not be available in the next version of SQL Server. Similarly, let's go and look at this one, use of select star. It will say that there were 2 violations found on this procedure, and it gives us the line numbers where the violations occurred. The same will happen with top without an order by clause, 1 violation, and the with hint specification, which is the other one, the other check in the category of SQL Server 2005 readiness. If I go ahead and look at the details, I'll see that line number 2 of this procedure, we will have a bit of a problem when upgrading to the next release. So even though BPA has a small report screen that lets you do some filtering, and it lets you go back and see the report again, a lot of the feedback that came from many of you was that you wanted rich reporting on top of the results created by BPA. So what we are shipping now is an integration with reporting services, SQL Server 2000 reporting services. And BPA includes 3 RDL files, report definition language files, which will mine the BPA repository and provide a richer set of features to get analysis on what was scanned on a BPA. So the first report is called BPA All Reports, which basically will just give me a list of all the reports available in the repository. Given that this was a brand new installation, we see that this is the only report available. I'm going to go ahead and click on the name of that one, and it will drill down into the summary information of that report. Here we see that the execution name, the best practice name, a graphical view that for this server 5 rules were not compliant, and the rest, this is 20 something, 23 or so, were found to be compliant. And here we see the details grouped by category. So we see which ones are compliant on the SQL Server 2005 readiness and which ones are not compliant. Similarly for the T-SQL category, with a brief explanation on what is it that is making it not compliant. But if I go back, I can go into a detailed report, which will basically show me the same things that we were looking in the BPA UI, but now grouped into a nice report. It'll say that for this rule there were no failures, but for example no, I don't find any failures. For example, for this one, the deprecated system tables, we do have 1 failure, and it gives us the same information, line numbers, types, objects, etc. So this, for those of you that have played with SQL Server 2000 reporting services, you'll see that you can export to multiple formats, you can zoom in, you can get paging, very rich functionality to get nice reports on top of what was found by BPA. So with this we conclude the demo. I encourage you to look at the website and download BPA, and most important, to send us feedback, sqlbpa@microsoft.com. Thanks. Okay, based on what we just saw, you have a good idea of what BPA looks like, what's the intention behind the tool, and how it can help you improve your applications. Moving forward, we're planning to implement more rules and make them available as we have them. But most important of all, we are very open for feedback. We would love to hear from you. We would love to hear what you like about the tool, what you don't like, suggestions for improvements, suggestions for new rules. If you want to send us mail to sqlbpa@microsoft.com. We'd love to hear what you think. Thank you.